Wolfgang, but that didn't make it. Now for tonight's night's news. A knight came before his commander and asked, "Why, my liege, are some things spoken of only in metaphor?" And the king replied, "Consider what things are generally talked about in not such a manner." What can you say of a species whose entertainments are primarily the glorification of what they perceive to be their shortcomings? S.H. Spooky, huh? Knights and their indigenous architecture. Castles were constructed with windows not to merely look out of, but to ultimately escape through. A student of such matters once paused and pondered, why do the metaphors and parables such as these always picture the mystical adventurers as knights, warriors, men of action, rather than as thinkers and philosophers? There was once a race of men who believed themselves prisoners in some difficult to define, yet quite real place of confinement, and lacking sufficient knowledge of their position made any action they might take appear problematic. Yet no amount of reflection seemed to reveal their true location. There are some things from which there is no escape, and the mortal mind is one of them. Hence the Templars few who search for a new area of consciousness. The reflective nature of the glass with which men have covered their windows is such that one can glance out and be startled by one's own reflection, taking it to be another. After years of watching himself juggle, one man learned to do it without watching. How simple things are when explained the right way. As the adventurers looked at the formidable challenge that lay before them, the leader of the expedition said, "Those who survive this undertaking will come out of it with a new appreciation for life, and those who don't, a new appreciation for death." No doubt about it, fair is fair, even when things have you by the hair. As they passed through a woods, a certain knight came upon a creature which claimed to be luck. He bothered not his sword to draw. And when confronted with another purporting to be fate, he didn't even slow down. Some advice originally given ordinary men and those who wanted to become so. Go ahead and laugh at your own jokes, just in case. Same for looking thoughtful after a serious comment. A notation not offered this crowd. You can always tell a man who does know what he's talking about by the fact that he's not talking. Ha ha, just a joke, ha ha. There was once a knight who strenuously studied the matter of the great adventure and the wondrous Grail, and became as knowledgeable on the subject as any in the kingdom. But alas, he spent far too much at home in the castle and blew his chance. Cautionary note, you can't correctly bad-mouth theorizing until you have personally choked on it. Mentally speaking, without alertness, there is nothing. Well, nothing except the mind. It was just a joke. That wasn't any damn joke, by the way. Eyesight, or possible sightings for eyes. A rhyme. You can look out, or you can look in, but a man who does both is his own best pal. Well, maybe we should all work on that one. One extraordinary aspect of the real mystical warrior is that he has no foes. Compare this to a routine man's view of life. One extraordinary aspect of the mystical warrior is that he has no foes. Are we here by any chance referring not to the physical opposition of other humans, but to mental ones within oneself? In all books about the transcendental adventure, the main chapters are missing, the true and revealing ones. History concerns the mundane, living the few. Crippled cliches remedially torpedoed and suitably sunk. The secret, considered unknowable by the ordinary, is just the main body of the iceberg. Were it not easier to stare than not stare, men would not have created their images of static gods, gods with unmoving eyes. A night state of health in regards to withdrawal. Reclusion is not for remedial purposes. Only a warrior, now totally well, can pay the price for living alone. The final expense being no ills left to hide. If you rename anything enough times, people will forget what it was originally, even if it was nothing. Anyone who suspects this may have something to do with man's so-called personality and individual mental capacity, or with his conception of reality and the truth, or with anything else he talks about, is certainly not a person of pedestrian suspicions. Mystics and man's aboriginal roadways. While man's normal-born mind is paved with grease and glue, a more realized one is paved with abandonment. There was once a knight who would fire his pistol out the castle windows, then eventually began to stick his arm outside the window and fire back in. Then ultimately came up with a whole new trick in this regard. One warrior's traveling song. Oh, there's homicide and there's suicide. Then there's thought in action, riding side by side. A parable to a starving swordsman is like food to an obese thinker. On the planet of plain enlightenment, there are but 4 prohibitions. No metaphors, no allegories, no similes, and no thinking that doesn't mean what you mean it to mean. How it goes, when it goes correctly. The original Buddha took Buddha mind seriously. His son, however, had a different take on it. The tale of one warrior and his equity of communication. To keep things balanced, since he accepted no calls, this one knight stopped making any. And speaking of justice, there was also a certain neural explorer who settled his banking activities by destroying both his checks and deposit slips. The difference between knights and the townspeople is that when townspeople believe themselves sick, they don't really want to get any better. Were this not the fact, such phenomena as religion and psychiatry would never have appeared. Only the flawed believe themselves so. And even Houdini with a barrel of bear grease couldn't get out of that one. On one world, 'tis considered bad form to kill anyone while they're undressed. Few mystics stay there for long. An ordinary mind cannot function without a model. As a few have continued to periodically realize, the absolute greatest place to hide a secret is right out in the open. No, don't go looking out the windows now trying to see it. A man who believes that his childhood had anything to do with shaping his present character is still a child. Reminder, you should never repeat such things as this to the townspeople, since it is untrue, disheartening, and unpalatable after its first telling amongst the knights. Everyday imagination's not so bad, if you never think about it. The drug that life most commonly and secretly prescribes for man is, hey, look over, no, stare over this way. One way to remain simple-minded and not unnaturally disturbed is to only listen with two ears. One man looked at his typewriter, then at his blank paper, then into the cache of ideas in his mind and thought, which will run out first? It does a man no good to be too clever. He must be 4, 8, even 10 times clever. Only the liberated are able to see how things truly are, and intelligent enough not to ever say anything about it. Wolves howl, sheep bleat, men talk, and lemons are a dime a piece sometimes. At the end of the evening's activities, a proper bacterial host always kills his parasitic guests. A man who's sick of everything is not yet sick of the right thing. That's part of the secret, don't you know? Another tip from the Warrior's Guide. When properly alert, 'tis hard to be hostile. And as unexpected as it may at first sound, a true warrior is never hostile. Ordinary minds are made to conceive of imaginary lands with imaginary goals, imaginary foes, and sources of imaginary assistance. Only by such means can men mentally believe that they can get somewhere in life. Townspeople put their maps on paper so that they can have something with discernible edges and boundaries which they can fold up into neat, symmetrical, and comfortable packets. The reaction of outsiders who hear of the great mystical quest is generally of two sorts. One group believes it to be a most mysterious, serious undertaking, while the other finds it to be a joke of some kind. One of these two groups is closer to the truth than the other. Query, is it more impolite, would you think, to be funny at the wrong time or solemn? I should be honest with you and admit that this is a trick question, in that you've got to be out of your mind to possibly answer it. Assuming you'll translate out of your mind to mean beyond your normal one, right? There are ties that bind all men together, which are not normally seen. Ergo, only the unnormal see them. The good townsfolks do so enjoy thinking of the warriors in the castle on the hill as somehow weird and unnatural, that we should not interfere with this small pleasure. The snare, once you accept someone else's contrived premise, the very best you can hope for is their imagined payoff. Only a reality with at least 5 dimensions is revealing and worthy of a real mind's attention. The simple, the weak, and the sick enjoy most the company of their own kind. It is, in fact, about all they can tolerate. And now some fifth order physics. Just as water physically seeks its own level, so does routine thought insist on its equitable counterparts. I think that's kind of another way of saying that dumb birds are sticky or something like that. Naturally viscid. No matter how deeply hidden in metaphor, the first task of the true adventurer is to go out and discover plain talk. And if you can't find any, invent some. A nosy night is a happy night. Secretly nosy, I might add. How did the question of caffeine get into this? Those who understand the power of the mind lightly, nor with sugar. Straight, thank you. Straight. While there are several ways of looking at everything, those who know have it down to one. Sometimes even less than that. And one man's enjoiner to himself was, don't watch action, create it. I'm going to take another run at something I've mentioned several times recently, that nothing new here, but I was going to say it's hard to describe, but perhaps if I pull on it a bit, you'll see why such things are hard to describe, because the difficulty of their description is part of their reality. No, don't jump off yet. Don't jump out the window. Wait a minute. It has to do with the fact that the mind, the ordinary mind, cannot operate, cannot function without a model. Even a variation of that, the ordinary man cannot function save being part of a model. There's a bumper sticker going around that says, reality, dash, deal with it. And T-shirts and etc. Which a while back was another one, something about, anyway, there's been several about reality in the last 10 or 15 years. And rather than just take it as a joke, let me point out that accepting those who may have stuck it on their car as some sort of lark, surely you all understand that nowadays that sort of thing is taken. It's nothing new, but even though it's maybe a bumper sticker and might make you chuckle when you saw it, the people, other than those that take it as a joke, the few, most of them would be putting it on their car, wearing it on a T-shirt, or repeating it with a certain amount of solemnity, and would consider themselves, I'm not making fun of it now, or the people, and consider themselves thinkers at least of a non-routine order. They would consider themselves somewhat more intellectually active, socially conscious, and etc., than probably the guy next to him with a bumper sticker that says shit happens. Reality, dice, deal with it. Don't stick with a bumper sticker. That's of no importance, but it just shows it's now passed around to people that stick bumper stickers on their car. They and many other people, if they heard it, consider, if they think at all, if they consider themselves thinkers, and if they consider themselves socially, intellectually, politically aware, alert, concerned, a good citizen of the planet, they would consider, they would find great merit with the notion of reality, deal with it. Because from there you could list in as subdivisions, much of them nowadays having to do with ecology, having to do with social justice, having to do with political change, economic change. That the inference being that reality is one thing and that men are inclined to get it skewed, which of course each person with the bumper stickers, assuming that they have some fairly correct take on reality, and that those who do not agree with their views need to confront it, to deal with it. Shape up, people. That's what they're saying. The reality is out there. We can't quit. We can't continue living in some sort of dream world, in some sort of state of confusion. And they would consider that kind of exhortation about reality to deal with it to be of some importance. Here's the thing about it. And this is not philosophy, again, although philosophy has played with this for years and years. The mind, the ordinary mind, is not what it calls dealing with reality. Rather than me say it's not reality. What they're dealing with, what it conceives of, is a model of reality. And this is not open, it's not a philosophical theory, but they're dealing with some model of reality. And the reason I've thrown in twice already tonight that it's not some philosophical game is because that is so common at the philosophical level, and is even makes periodic appearances within the area of philosophy, of psychology even. We're going through another phase right now publicly of there being psychologists would-be psychological, even scientific / philosophers, back to the idea that reality as normally perceived may not actually be reality, that each person in some way in their own mind creates reality, and that there's some reality outside the mind and we just don't know what it is. Every time a generation comes along and somebody comes up with that, as always, the people, especially the guy who thought of it, believes it's a brand new discovery. My God, there's the ground! But I covered part of that tonight. If you keep renaming anything enough times, people forget what it was originally. Even if it wasn't, if it was just bullshit, if it was nothing. All you got to do is keep renaming it, and not only the original has been forgotten, but if the original was actually imaginary, if the original was of questionable pertinence and existence to start with, if you keep renaming that son of a bitch long enough, people forget everything about it. It now has that kind of historical patina from which ordinary minds are loath to shake themselves. There is no kind of dip that you might use for your tarnished silverware that you can use for that kind of apparent validity and genuineness simply brought on by, well, that's an old idea, so it must be true. You can try dipping your head in some kind of turn off, and you'll come out, and the damn models are still stuck to you. But perhaps I'm wasting my time with too much of the warning in front, but that we're not speaking now about the idea that each person creates some form of reality, and that there's some kind of reality out there, and that each person's mind is creating their own, and therefore it differs slightly. All that's true, but that's not what I'm talking about. That's child's play. I mean, Adam's grandson discovered that. Since then, it's just been a continual rediscovery of, my God, we're standing on the planet. The sky's up there. It's that sort of thing. I'm trying to get you considered at another quite real and operational level, so that it's not theory, because you can see it in action. You're a part of it. But it's tricky to see. That is, there's a model going on. And that's what people deal with. It is the only way, and it's not some flaw in the human enterprise, and it's not some mistake that the human mind is making, because at the natural born level, the ordinary level of mind, it cannot function without a model. And remember, the second version is it cannot function save being part of a model. That it must feel it's part of the model. You therefore have all of the many philosophies, all the many religions, and almost everything else that the human mind is conceived of is some form of a model, but let's make it simple enough to discuss. Let's take religion, Christianity, the easy one. And each person's mind normally has more than one model, but it may have, if asked, a controlling model. It may have a primary model. So you might ask a man, tell us something about yourself, sir, before we go on with the quiz today, and so that you could win some nice luggage and a used blender we have here. So a man says, well, my name's so-and-so, and I have a wife and 2 pretty good-looking children, and I'm an accountant, and I live in Teaneck, and I'm of Italian ancestry, and I am a Christian. I'm an active member of my local church. And if you ask him later, he might, he'd list all those things. They identify himself by occupation, nationality, his marital status. And but let's just say he considers at least his religion, Christianity, just one of any I can figure out, of course, as being of primary importance. Now remember, this is just one. I just selected because it's normally easiest to talk about, because it seems to, it somewhere have brushed so close to the true transcendental effort. And the overview, let me remind you, that I brought out again tonight, is without some sort of extrinsic, without some sort of model that has been contrived by someone else, that a man's mind, each person's mind has to keep going through this, without there being some model out there that you can adopt, that you can buy into, there is no way to come up with a mental sensation of getting anywhere in life. None. Which once you begin to see that, the whole idea is one model better than another. Is it better to be a Jew or a Christian? Is it better for it to rain or snow? Anyway, is it better to be a Democrat than a Republican? Anyway, it is what I'm talking about now. Just to take the one thing, Christianity. If you buy into Christianity, to put it very crudely, if you adopt it, all of this is misspeak because you suddenly find yourself a Christian. You're supposed to know that. But if you adopt Christianity, you get old enough that you're of age, and just because your parents were followers of some religion is no longer, you consider, binding on you, and then in some way you freely choose, yes, I will stick here and I will be a Christian. Without that, without occupation, without some model. Now, occupation, remember, is not the same as work. We're not talking about you getting out and planting tubers and pulling them out each day to feed your family. We're talking about occupation as a secondary version of the primary eat or die. We're talking about now models. When I say occupation, it's a judgment of success, because we're assuming already that you can feed your family, that you could do it without this occupation. But your occupation, being an accountant, being an attorney, being a writer, being a member of the management team at Microsoft, it is a model. You went there and you joined up, either the Catholic Church, some church, you freely signed your name, or you went and you applied for a job with IBM. They told you all the requirements, how you had to dress when you had to be there. They gave you a brochure, probably a nice fat one, with the company philosophy, which is the model. And it tells you what you might expect. It tells you the entry level of pay and benefits to which a person of your experience and person of your background, your education, may expect. And it will tell you, generally speaking, over the course, the statistical course of IBM's history thus far, what you may expect should you continue to work for that company X number of years. You can look down, there'll be all kinds of charts and diagrams showing how you move up, the kind of pay scale. Christians tell you, Christianity, all religions tell you, join up here, live by the rules and do such as this, and here will be, you're making some progress. You know, Sunday schools, they used to, for those of you that ever attended such, the little nippers, they'd give you, once you attend Sunday school faithfully on time for a month, they put a gold star by your name up there. Once you get out of that and get into the big church, it's like sort of, and it's like a win-lose game after that. They don't do so much about putting stars up, I guess. They give you recognition that you've been a member 20 years and they throw a dinner, but the big payoff is, it's like just win or lose. That now that you're a Christian, you're making some kind of progress because you're getting closer to redemption, to salvation. You're getting closer to the time that you will die and all the secrets will be revealed, and etc. You understand all of this? Now, remember, we're not talking about simply a physical existence, if that were possible for man, but in the same way that physical existence is all a dog has. There is no getting anywhere in life. I keep bringing out these examples, but sometimes I guess it helps. Just think when you're on your own right quick. In that same respect that we have in common with all the other animated creatures on this planet, there is no getting anywhere. You live or you die. There's no getting anywhere. A dog doesn't get to be a better dog. There's nothing a cat can do to become a superior cat. There's nothing a hippo can do to make other hippos stand aside and envy him, write him nasty, unsigned notes. You can't get anywhere. You're born a hippo, you die a hippo. Getting anywhere. There's not even the illusion. There's not the attempt. Now that's plain enough. All right. So we're talking about the world, at least that part of man's existence that is singular to him, and that is his mental world. Now that mental world is where it is only possible for there to be a conception, a notion of getting somewhere. But it does not simply fly out of an individual fully born. It will not even ignite in an individual. That's why an individual cannot mentally, well, I don't go into that. That's why men live as social creatures. They are social creatures at the same hormonal level as many other animals on this planet. But man is also a social creature at a non-physical level, which I was pointing out last time I was reading news items to you, that is one of the purposes of speech. It is a mental social adhesive. In the same way that animals normally are rubbing each other, sniffing each other, cleaning one another, doing such as that, and it's I'm just taking a zoologist's view of it, a common view, that is a binding mechanism in the group, in the pack. Humans, of course, physically do the same thing. Romance, you hug your children, you hug a sexual partner. Friends will just touch each other and grab you by the arm. We all know that. You get close to people you like. But there is another one that's not given any notice, and that is that speech is another order, a mental order, social bonding. Speech and listening is why I presented when I read it, was like a little dance. It's listen, talk, talk, listen, listen, talk, talk, listen. It's a byplay that you clean the fleas. If you were a chimp, you'd be picking the fleas off somebody else, off their back, and then they turn around, or you turn around, they pick it off your back. That's mentally listening and then talking, and then listening and then talking is the same thing. Back to where we were, though. A mind needs other minds. In the same way a human would not actually develop even physically if he were just simply dropped. If you were suddenly, we had a human child and he grew up with no human companionship, he will not physically grow up to be a human. You will, I guess, physically be able to identify him as opposed to a chimpanzee or an orangutan or other of that ilk, but mentally, he certainly wouldn't. The mind not only must have other people, they simply represent the franchisees of it. They simply represent the slave workers of it. And the it being a model. There has to be a model. And if it was not something as specific, if you want to move back in history to see theoretically how we could paint the picture, it does not have to be anything perhaps as clear-cut and easily defined as the Catholic Church or as Reformed Judaism or as the American Democratic Party. It could have been just originally the kind of even unspoken or unwritten social norms of a tribe. If you want to do that old classical picture of our caveman forefathers and just civilization beginning. They then had to have a model. Now, we're talking about behavior. It would be a very subtle shift if you're going to look at it being that kind of cartoon evolution. Not talking about behavior because they would have to have already overcome to some degree. They had already made even an unwritten social contract amongst themselves, those who are now becoming sociable and civilized, that we will no longer, whenever possible, we will no longer hit each other on the head with rocks to take each other's food or women. And some group of them go, well, okay. And a few on the fringes of the meeting go, screw all that. And so they have to pick up rocks and drive them off like, well, you guys go away. The rest of us, we're going to try to do right. Notice I always say try, and at the best of our, as best as possible, we all hold up our hands, we say, to the best of my ability, to the best of my ability, I will no longer hit my neighbor, I will no longer hit my neighbor from behind with a large rock in the head, just to get his wife or anything else he's got. And they'll go, maybe somebody said, you did say the best of our ability. And went, yeah, so anyway, they have had to already gone through some of that. But that is not the real bonding, that is not the real adhesive for humans. Because as you should know, even animals with no intellect can do that and have done that. Life has arranged it in that way. That they will not kill. The more that the animal is a so-called social creature, the less likelihood is that they're going to engage in morbific behavior over anything. It's not that it's not possible in the same way it's not possible that it's not impossible for humans to kill one another. But the more social the animal, the more their behavior stops somewhere. Their aggressive behavior amongst themselves stops somewhere this side of homicide, of murder. But back to the mind. An ordinary mind cannot function, if you want me now to say function properly, properly and fully, even at the ordinary level, without a model. It is just as plain as standing on the earth that at the ordinary level, you and everyone else's mind, yours and everyone else's mind, would not have ever functioned, and now still normally functions, by grace of models. And all of this is descriptions I'm limiting right now to three-dimensional reality, which is not the extent of it, but it appears to be, so it makes it perhaps somewhat digestible. The models are always externally produced as far as the individual is concerned. No individual, no ordinary mind ever conceives of his own religion. Ordinary mind. No ordinary mind ever conceives of his own social system. He never conceives of his own political party. He never conceives of his own economic model. No, it's not that such things couldn't pass through your mind, but it would always be a variation, some personally wish for spin on what's going on. Like somebody could be part of a Christianity, mainstream Christianity, and they have a certain, shall we say, strongly driven sexual desires, and they start thinking, well, I would start my own religion. If I started my own religion and I was head of the church, one of the first rules would be not only still no adultery, but except any woman who wants to go to bed with me can, and God will bless them for it. But you understand, that's not the idea. The man did not come up with his idea of starting his own religion. All he thought about was some personally pleasurable dream of what he could do with an already existing model. The mind will not function without a model, and it can be an anti-model. Somebody, how about atheists? Somebody grew up in a good religious household of any kind, and they say that now one of their large areas of interest in life is atheism. They may run a local chapter of Atheists of America. They may put out a newsletter. They may make appearances. They may make a living off of it. And they can say, well, at least I don't have a model that's religious. Once you see it, it's irrelevant. The point is, it is a model, and by all intents and purposes, by all appearances, at that same ordinary level where you start, it is always a model. It's as though your mind got cranked up. Your ordinary mind. Yours and everybody now. We're just talking about everybody, the way it starts. And it's as though the mind looks around that it has this potential. It has this chemical, electrical energy, and it's like, what can I do? What can I do? That even you give it credit and say that it has some notion about what thinking is. They can have a few thoughts and go, yeah, but it's just a bunch of irrelevant thoughts. Or a bunch of separate, what can I do? It seems to be formless for those of you that like to go back and re-examine Genesis and the Hindu scriptures, that originally everything was void, formless, and the guides put it into some cohesive model. That's the way the mind goes through, that it must adopt model or models before it can begin to function. And the models, again, let me stress, this sounds metaphorical at times. Once you see it, it's not. What I've referred to in the past is the difference between man's instinctive physical existence and his mental, and in times past I referred to it as the primary and the secondary. That the primary is that man's instinctive physical life, eating, sleep, etc., without which you would not survive, period. But in a sense, the secondary, man's mental life, is sort of an offshoot, almost a side effect, almost an afterthought. None of these are absolutely true, but it is built upon the primary, that you can get along without the secondary. You would still survive. But then men believe that there are variations to that there are degrees of quality, importance, pertinence, significance. And my dear fellow friends and Baptist neighbors, that is not so. Except you can't see it when your mind is part of any model. The mind, to start operating, the ordinary mind, has got to buy into, has got to accept, has got to try and function, or will function within what it perceives to be this model that's already there. And the greatest attraction, notice, it's the gravitational, it is the gravitational pull that history, that longevity holds with some validity. It would certainly hold physically. If there was somebody alive that was 1,000 years old, they would have a certain charisma to them. I mean, if they were still healthy, you could get up and move around, they would physically, no, literally, they would physically have a certain charisma and attraction, even if their intelligence, their level of consciousness was no more than everybody else's. If they had lived that long, there would be. So there is a power and an attraction to longevity. It's genetic, quite physical, quite real. It's just not taken into account. But at any rate, there is also one, a parallel one, mentally. And so the main models, in any particular area, there's just going to be a handful of models. They're all the same. We just change the names all around the world. It's normally family, occupation, local mores, religion, the nationality, which is the tribe, but those same kinds of things. There's only a handful of them, and those are the models already in place. And someone born in that locale, in that village, in that country, in that society, unless they are an out-and-out, deranged, diswired rebel, if they stay within the mainstream, and even should they struggle a little bit, they will still end up with their mind operating within the general models, or else, as I said, if they can contain their sanity by ordinary standards, they might become a rebel, they might become an atheist, whereas the majority of the tribe was religious. But it will still be that their mind is operating within the confines of the local models. And they did not conjecture, they did not conjure up the models. They did not invent them. They had nothing to do with the models. No matter what the mind can say afterwards, and it can certainly say otherwise, in the same way as I said, a man's mind, if accused of this and understood it, could say that's not true. I am not a follower, I'm religious, but I am not a follower of any mainstream religion. And they could even say, in fact, I'll be glad to tell you specifically why. I can pick out instances wherein I have done my own thinking, my own research, and decided that the main tenets of this religion, that religion, etc., are in error. And I'll be glad to show you where I have seen the light. But that's not anything original. You understand? The only way his mind worked, which is sort of the pathetic humor that I've tried to bring up a little bit, pathetic in a nice sense, of ordinary people passing themselves to themselves, believing and claiming to be intellectuals and free thinkers, and no one ever sees the fact of how can you call yourself, from any wider than three-dimensional kindergarten view, how can you call yourself an original thinker, and the only thing you think about, the only thing you talk about, the only thing you write about, are the things everybody else is thinking about. Now, as always, you can't go to the townspeople this story and make them see it, because they'll go, well, what the hell do you mean? And if I say, well, all right, your books, everything is on, everything you talk about. You're a famous talker, you're a famous thinker, and the only thing you talk about, or the main things you talk about is what is going on in Washington, D.C., if we were here in America, is what's going on in the nation's capital, in the halls of Congress, and with the White House. That's what you talk about every day. And if you're not talking about that, your other interest is economics, and you're talking about what the Federal Reserve is doing, and what the gross national product up and down, and interest rates. And the guy go, what, are you crazy? And I'd say, but that's all you talk about. And he'd go, well, it's my field of interest. And I said, but you call yourself an original thinker. And he'd say, well, I do. I don't. A whole lot of things they come up with, the president of these plans he proposes. Hey, don't you read my articles every day? I tear him to pieces. And when it goes to Congress, and I'm nonpartisan, when I see an idea, when something comes out of Congress, be it from the Democratic or the Republican side, I won't hesitate to point out that the emperor dropped his drawers again. And he'd look at me like, you're crazy. And if I was dumb enough to go along with this, I'd want to look at him like, well, you're beyond crazy. You can't even think. I mean, just listen to what I say. How can you call that original thinking when all you think about is what everybody else thinks about? You understand you're not going to get anywhere, because the mind cannot move off of that level. And his defense would be, if he would lower himself to discuss it any further with obviously a deranged mind such as I was displaying then, he would say, well, I picked out not only what's of interest to me, but, my God, my good man, I'm picking out areas of significance to each and every American. What do you want me to talk about? I only dissect, I only think about, I only reflect, ruminate, ponder, muse on subjects of importance. At least I'm not here doing some kind of thing about entertainment tonight or giving you gossip about movie stars. I write my column every day, and I make my speeches and my television and radio programs on politics and economics, by God, things that impact our civilization, our day-to-day existence, and our children's. And he'd look at me like, what are you, some kind of idiot? Which, true, it seems idiocy. I was going to try this. I know I can talk about this and you will laugh and react to the examples such as that. But once you see where you're trapped mentally, then these kind of guffaws and chuckles are nothing. It'll take your breath away. Because you can't get off, you can't get out of the level of the model. It's like a board game. The mind gets started by adopting one or more parts of other models. Models that's already in place. Either buying into parts of them, you understand, it's all a matter of degree. That's one of the things that makes men pass themselves off as being individuals. Is you do not adopt all the entire model of Christianity. You may not adopt the entire model of my country, right or wrong. You may not adopt the entire model and all the adjacent precepts to a free market economy. But there are models in general that you had to adopt them, or your mind would not even begin to function. But it is like a board game. If your mind to get going, you had to select a place on the board. Figuratively speaking, you had to select a place on the board, and you started playing. It's like you find a place, so I can get here. I can stand here, and it seems to make some sense. You've got friends, you've got family that seems to be playing in the same general area of the board. The kinds of cards, the kinds of pieces you move around, whatever the hell the game is that you want to imagine, but it seems to have some familiarity to you. It seems somewhat comfortable that I'll start here until I can figure out what I'm up to. You got to do something. If no other way to look at it, they threw you in school when you're a little nipper, and they forced you to start playing a game. And so there you are. And you find out, well, if I ever want to get out of this game of grammar school, which any decent, at least male-thinking child hates school, like you should. So as soon as you got through the first few days of kindergarten or first grade, and you went, how much longer do I have to put up with this crap? And somebody tells you 12 years, and you go, oh my God. But then you find out that it can be longer than 12 years. The teacher points over to some other kid that looks big enough to be your father and say, well, that's what happens when you don't study. He's been held back 17 times. So for no other reason, I wanted you to see that even the idea that in some way that you bought into it is why, or you accepted it, it's not even necessary that you look at it that way. You start off, in a sense, being forced, if you want to look at it that way. None of this is important other than try to get you an entree in your own thinking to see what this means. That if nothing else, you're forced to buy into one model. I guess that's good as in his elementary school. You start your public education, your required education, and your family and teachers tell you when you rebel against it, you say, well, I don't like this. And they go, well, like it or don't like it. The law even says, forget us, the law says you have to go to public school until you're 16 years old. Now that's 16 years. Now, if you want to screw around with that, if you don't want to buy into this, if you don't want to play the game, at least to a minimal level, and make C's, make a passing grade, it can be twice that long. They can keep holding you there. It can be worse. So, in a sense, you can say that you're forced into, everybody is, even if you didn't go to school, you'd be forced into your social milieu, into your family, whatever the tribal customs, whatever. You're forced into playing a game. So there you are on the board. But here it is. There is no change. You got my permission not to leave this at metaphor, although it obviously has to be. Here it is, this board game, human life, mentally, not physically. We're talking strictly mental. Here's this board game. Now at that level, if the board game is equal to a model, you understand. That is the mental model that all minds must adopt, must buy into, must agree to. Because if you don't agree to play up down the board somewhere, you are outside the mainstream, you end up discarded. You end up being in a hospital, a home, a prison. Now, you're just simply not even that which we minimally speak of around here. You're an anomaly. But on that board, there you are mentally. Do you understand that there is nothing resembling change possible on that board? Let me strike that. There is no real change possible. What is possible, and the only thing that is possible, is moving the pieces around. But you can't get off the board. But until you buy into, until your mind has a model of that game, there's not even a sensation of movement. You can't believe that I'm getting anywhere in life. But once you have adopted the model, or been forced doing, but once you have now part of the game, of someone else's model, and models, in the plural, you're now up there on that board. And now, like in any board game, the pieces go somewhere. Monopoly, whatever it is, Chinese checkers, you go somewhere. You roll dice, you try to make deals, and you go somewhere. Now do it as fast as you can, back and forth and simultaneous from metaphor to reality. That is to real reality. On that board, you do get somewhere. You do make progress. You take away Park Place from somebody else. You jump somebody and take their piece. You foreclose on their little hotel in St. Charles Place. They foreclose on you. There's setbacks. You go to jail. There's all of this. But literally, you cannot get off the board. But remember this. The mind would have no conception of even that kind of apparent progress and failure, but apparent possibility of getting somewhere until you get in that model. But in that model, it is truly, truly an illusion. Without any pejorative connotation to the word, it is simply an illusion to say you're getting somewhere. You're moving the pieces around. In some way you can move thoughts around the same way you can say, I used to be a believer in state-controlled economy. It's hard to believe now, but after much research and a small period of enlightenment and off on a weekend retreat with Alan Greenspan and two or three of his thugs who beat me senseless with blackjacks, I realized free market is the way to go. And a man can call that progress, especially if the latter is the prevailing model of his time and place. The people around him go, well, you're beginning to straighten up. You're beginning to see better. And he feels like he's getting somewhere. In the same way the teacher says, well, you made a B this time. You know, Johnny, you're doing better. Last time you made a C. And you beam, which is all right until you think about, what the hell does it mean? What was the quiz in? I don't even know. What do you want to make up? Think up the most useless, moot thing that you ever were forced to study, and yet in the midst of you being there studying it. This is very common among kids, people in school, is be sitting there belly aching about the course. You know, why in the hell do we have to take trigonometry? Why do we have to take American history? I'm not even going to fool with this. And you badmouth it, but you're there still playing the game knowing you've got a guy at school. And suddenly the teacher calls out the papers for the test and calls you by name and says, by the way, I want to congratulate you here before the class. You started out making D's here, and look at this, you made a B+. And you just got through bad-mouthing that the class meant nothing, and suddenly you beam. You're supposed to. Because the class, you're correct, meant nothing, but also you're getting somewhere and doing better in the class. It meant an equal amount of nothing. Except it has to, and it did appear to be something. Here's the thing. Once you're on the board, once you buy into somebody else's premise, taking that in the loosest sense, as though you had a choice. But the point is, once you buy into, once you're there in somebody else's model, and you continue to go along with it as you're supposed to, that is one of the general definitions of being normal and sane. But once you're in somebody else's model, you're in their game. And when I say they, I'm not talking about the Catholic Church, I'm not talking about the Democratic Party, I'm talking about, you know what, life. And the several and various and sundry models that life has provided here on earth for man. Once you are part of one of those models, that is one of those games, the very best you can ever hope for is their imaginary payoff. But it is strictly imaginary. Because once you see that everything on the board is at that same level, you can't get off that board. Which people, in a sense, know this, is why that there is periodically, at least, fortune cookie insights into the fact that, well, I should do better than that. Even religion, people put up with this once a week to hear some minister or rabbi holler, success will do you no good. Success does not have the fully satisfying taste that man seeks. And you can sit there on Sunday, especially if you had a bad week and lost a bunch of money in the stock market, and go, yeah. In other words, you like to hear somebody in a position of authority say, wealth means nothing to a real man. Someday your payoff will come out in non-physical treasures, you know, in heaven or somewhere. Once a week people like to hear that. But the reason they like to hear it is basis closer to the truth than the rest of than anything else that can be said about the models. Because what they're saying without knowing it is, this game of Christianity or Judaism or whatever it is, this game is meaningless. You can't get off the board. There is no progress. It's all an illusion, but we've got to all keep it up to think, well, am I getting somewhere? Well, yes, you moved up from a D to a B. Wow! Your broker says, you made another $10,000 this week off the market. Now remember, we're not talking about money to buy you food. We're talking about now to where money, wealth, is simply bookkeeping. It is simply a game that you look down and you've got a chart on the wall. Or you've got it in your computer somewhere that you keep saying, well, hey, I'm moving up like this. And it means nothing. You got more money you can spend. You don't spend what you have. It's all a game, but once you're in that model, everybody else's model, the ones that life provides, you understand when I say the very best payoff is the illusionary one of that game. But the payoff never comes, and if it did come, it won't get you off the board. On top of all that, then what I was going to point out, where we started, of reality, deal with it, the ordinary mind is not dealing with, and now let's take, rather than me saying, trying to define reality for you, that we've got reality and then we've got models of reality, which is what I'm describing. And once you see it, it is not my description, it's not a theory. Everything that men normally think, no matter from the most mundane to the most grandiose, all the way from thinking that it's good to be faithful to your wife, to your mate, all the way from it's good to please the gods and live according to the dictates of some religion. I mean, just the wide, all of that is on the same level. So there's reality, and then there's all of these models containing everything that men ordinarily think about. And dealing with the models over here, you can never move. They are not revealing. They are not forthcoming. They cannot tell you anything except about themselves. They can't tell you anything about the table the game's sitting on, or the floor that the table that the game's sitting on, or the house within which the table that the board is sitting on. You understand? It cannot tell you at that level because all it can see is there. In contradistinction of that, I could close by pointing out that that would be another description of a mystic or mystics, or people who are not dealing with intermediaries. The whole idea of enlightenment I could describe, the Buddha mind, the liberation of consciousness, the Christ consciousness, all of that. That mystics are not dealing with an intermediary model, they're simply dealing directly with reality. That they would be the only ones that really had any right to have a bumper sticker, reality, I deal with it. Except they shouldn't even have a car, much less a bumper with a bumper sticker, but there you go.